Hello, and welcome to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm Deanna Anthony, one of your co-hosts today, and I'm joined with Gail, Shalan. What's up?
Hello.
And André, Santana.
Hey.
Now, sometimes it's more about the process than the actual destination, but sometimes they are equally important. Personally, breaking into other genres as an audiobook narrator is definitely about creating career longevity and creative abundance. And also, for me, it is a mode of connection. There is something special about finding the people doing the work that you believe in, that speaks to you, that speaks for you. But to actually produce fulfilling work with these people that goes out into the world, this is when I find that the process of being human and doing this work as an actor can create a bridge from a surviving experience to a thriving experience. But that's just me. Or is it? I know for a fact that it isn't. We are in community here, so we are going to get into it. So that's why I'm happy to have this discussion with today's co-host, Sanya Simmons. Hey!
Hi! Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am so thrilled to have you. I just can't wait to get into this. Like, it's going to be good. Now, Sanya
Anytime we talk, it's good, Deanna.
Every time we talk, it's good. So we're just bringing you into our fun, right? Sanya is an author. She's an audiobook narrator. She's a voice actor. She's a director, y'all. She's directing those audiobooks. And she's a musician. And she's narrated dozens of titles and is also a recipient of the Odyssey Award. She's very active in facilitating multiple Audio Publisher Association DEI initiative programs, working with me and André on the mentorship program, and also working on the new narrator workshop. So, like we said, we talk all the time. Sanya and I have had this discussion about breaking into other genres as an audiobook narrator. So, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Now, I have really strong feelings about this, and I'm going to share a lot of those feelings, and I hope people are okay with that. The only influence I want to put on top right at the beginning is to establish what I feel are some standouts. So I think things that can help us in helping people discover us would be training, samples, your bios, your profiles, doing your research so you know actually who and the what and the how and the why of everything. And then, of course, reach outs and branding. And, do you do other work? Do you need a pseudonym for your sci-fi, lit RPG, romance, erotic stories? Like, what is it? So I'm going to start with actually the last thing that Sanya and I talked about on this, and this thing of newness, right? Now, someone can be like new, just really kind of breaking in, not really known, don't really have a lot of titles under their belt. But even if they're new to this specific industry of working in publishing or working as an audiobook narrator, if they're an actor and they've been acting for decades, they are not new. And in the very beginning, I said that a few times to a couple of people. Yes, I'm new here, but I'm not new. Like, I've been doing it for a minute. And, it's a thing. So, Sanya.
Ma'am.
Let's get into like that whole defining thing, and then we'll just lead it into talking about the training. But actually letting people know where you come from, because you're an author. You're very artistic. So what was that experience for you?
It's interesting because I don't have a classical acting background. I'm not a person with a bunch of dialects under my belt or anything. Although I've lived all over the East Coast, in the Midwest for a while. So if I'm around people that talk a certain way, then the Midwest comes out again. I recently narrated a book that had Chicago in it a lot. And I thought, wow, I still say Chicago, and not Chicago or anything else. Like, the accent comes out with certain words. Although I've lived in the South for a really long time and I love the Southern accent. But anyway, yes, I am a performer. I've played flute since I was 10 years old, so over 45 years. I still play. I've sung in choirs since I was a little girl, and I always kind of didn't really claim my vocalist part because I don't have the classical training in that, but my classical flute training certainly informs my singing too. And so there's that vocal experience too, right? I always hesitate to say this because it sounds so cliche, but I am a lifelong lover of books. Like, I'm that book nerd who every summer was spending every day, literally every day the library was open. I was there in the children's section, reading multiple chapter books a day and going back for more. I just could not get enough. I've always loved reading to my kids. I'm very good at telling a story and, embodying the characters that are in those stories, even though I don't have the classical acting training. I know what I hear when I read, and I know what I feel when I read, and I know how to convey that. And yes, I'm an author. So I had that experience too of really empathizing with an author and understanding that an author's story is their baby. And I take care of the author's story like it's my baby because I know it's theirs. So, and my experience in the restaurant business as a manager, I understand about timelines. I understand about communication and how to manage a project. I was a training manager. I know all of these things. So when we come into this business, even if it's not a traditional route, we bring everything that we've been to who we are now as a narrator. And publishers do a really good job about encouraging us to tell them everything, but we don't know what to tell them sometimes, and, it might be an afterthought. Oh, let me go update my profile and say this, or maybe I shouldn't have said that because now I'm getting too much of that. And I really wanted to get away from it, because I think they really do try to do a good job of matching us based on what we give them. The challenge for me is the first thing that they found out I was good at, I started getting a lot of it. And so then when other publishers look at what's your catalog look like on Audible, then they think that's the only thing that I do when it's not. I'm still training in those other things. And yes, I have the samples on my website, but the name recognition might not be there yet in another genre, or the number of titles in that category might not be there yet.
Yeah. I mean, I like kind of where you went, where you were kind of just tapping on lived experience, because for me, training is foundational, but sometimes lived experience is your training, right? Like for me, I didn't know how living in New York was until I was on the streets, on the subway, in the snow, living that life. And so, yeah, I think lived experiences, also other work that we've done, you talked about restaurant management, those other positions, like other people, living abroad, all of that stuff is usable, right? They're transferable skills and experiences. So, yeah.
And that lived experience is training, but it's not a substitute for the technical training of our job. You have to have both. I think both are very important. So I'm not that person that came in and said, I know how to do everything. No, I've invested in my business. I've done mentorships. I've done, private coaching. I've done technical training where, okay, I might not be the audio engineer, but I know how to engineer my own stuff. I know how to punch and roll. I know how to use my DAW. And for the things that I might not go in depth with, I have a stack set up for that so that it does it for me because I paid somebody else to do it. So we have to know where our strengths are and how to work with those because we're all so different. And each project is so different, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So for for you, Andre and Gail, like, is it similar experiences? Is it different? I mean, I know you're both out in
Yeah.
New York. I know you also have the opportunity to be face to face and actually work in studio with engineers and, producers and casting directors. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah. And just as a quick sidebar on the route to that question too, like Sanya, just listening to you talk through that history, it's so funny processing like how much we have to know ourselves just to be able to communicate what it is that we want to publishers, producers, and even independent authors. But that was the description of someone who has thought deeply about how their past touches their work. Right. So that's its own challenge. I remember when I started, I feel like my first like 4 or 5 books were all fantasy. And I was like, I'm cornered. I can never do anything. Like no one will ever think I can do anything else. And it's really fascinating every time I've come into a new genre, what the circumstances have been. I feel like, there was when I did my first horror novel, like I remember the producer, because it was one of those like Dreamscape auditions, right? So the producer was like, "Oh, I wouldn't have thought to submit you," and so this process really like kind of gave us an opportunity to let the author be surprised. And so even thinking about what it means to like communicate what you want, communicate things you don't know you want, but be open, right? Say it in a way that leaves open the door for those things to arrive to you. And then additionally, to communicate against someone else's expectation of like what this space is or like what you're supposed to perform. So yeah, so that was fascinating to watch. And now I have to ask Deanna to reiterate her question.
Well, no, I think what you shared based off of what Sanya was saying is actually answering it, like knowing yourself to the point that you could communicate and answer that one question. Yes, I am this thing. And, or like a lot of people find but to be negative, but I don't. I'm like, yes, I can do that. But I also can, ba-boom, kaka, kiki, whatever it is. So, it's all about perspective sometimes. I think you answered my question. So that's awesome. What about you, Gail?
Yeah, I mean, specificity is always helpful, right? So I think it's interesting. I mean, I think the opportunities we get come from how well we articulate everything that's going on in here and where we've come from with what is needed in the industry. And ideally those things match up, but sometimes they overlap. There's a little Venn diagram space, but it's almost like a chain link, right? So there's always some stepping stone to something else. So I'm trying to think about, the first projects I started to get and what that led to somewhere else. And I often found, okay, so I did this one project and the character I played kind of mirrored the character I played in the next thing, even though the genre was completely different. Or I did this one project and the technical requirements of the language were very similar to the next technical requirements of the language in the other piece, but the genres are totally different. Or I did this book and then I did like 15 in the same genre. And so I think there's this sort of little, chain links and garden kind of sort of seedlings like blowing in the wind and picking up where they're being nurtured, where there's a need. And you're talking about life experience and technical training sort of being hand in hand. I think I came from the opposite side of things. I was one of those kids who rolled out of the womb and was like, I want to be an actor. And I was very lucky that truly, like, I would like go up to neighbors' houses at the age of 2 and be like, this is my grandfather, and we're now going to do a show for you. Can I come play in your backyard? My parents were like, oh my gosh, who is this child? Like, we don't recognize this person. I just wanted to play all the time. And I was very lucky to have a lot of those opportunities. I did a ton of training from a very early age and started working professionally at a very early age, like I think you have as well, Deanna. And then there came the point as an adult where I was like, wait a second. I can play forever, but I don't know very much about what it's like to be a real human who's not an actor. I'm a Muppet. That's all I am. But really, like, so I needed to go learn about what it was like to tell an adult human story. And I think there's so much to be said for all of those private, non-observed, non-performed moments of just being a human in the world that we all need to experience. So yeah, I guess that's kind of been my journey. I don't feel boxed in so much, but I think it's to do with being really vocal about all the things that I feel like I am.
Yeah.
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 There was one thing you said in there, Gail, about how you were connecting kind of like how these themes kept reemerging across books, even though they were so in such different genres. When I did a great audiobook adventure, and we had to write our bios, and I wrote this one throwaway line that through all the changes I've made in all my marketing has recurred in almost every like bio I've written for myself. And that was something around like, and I wrote this when I had like 5 books, was something around like, I want to, regardless of genre, I want to record books that remind me what it means to be human.
Mm.
And listening to you describe that felt like another version of that same thought of like, I can do the YA rom-com and feel all these kind of like emotional scenes and feel this kind of resonance, and then do the lit fic and feel this kind of like resonance and you know, think about interpersonal connection and all these different things, and then do the horror and feel, and I feel like maybe that's part of it, connecting to what Deanna is saying about like, what are all these things you need, is like finding your through line that's going to like be the needle that you thread into like other genres that you like bring with you. Like, I've only done sci-fi, but I'm going to be great for your lit fic because I know people. I know how to bring a group alive in a book, or like, so that, yeah, that was just really fascinating.
Yeah, right. Like I have this amazingly confidence in this amazingly proficient skill I can bring to any project, or I know exactly who I am in any world you put me in. So yes, I can go cross genres, but I'm always going to be that character in this story, you know, and I can do that in a second. I think those are the kind of things about being able to be expansive while also being incredibly specific.
You really
I like what you said. Yeah, both of you. I'm just like, yeah. But one thing you said, André, that has come up for me, being able to relate to what it means to be human, being able to feel what it means to be human in all of the stories. Well, one thing that one of my coaches said to me recently is, no matter what it is I'm doing, she could hear the humanity in every read. And that is something that I know that I bring to it. It's why I care so deeply about social justice issues and why I'm so good at those non-fic titles, right? But that same humanity is found in a whole lot of stories, like you said. So why not me?
Yeah.
Why not me? And I have to be confident in what I bring and when I'm asking for it, you know, not just, oh, please give me a try, but really, hey, this is what I bring. And this is why you need me to tell this story. This is why I'm the person to tell this story. Not that there's only one person who can tell a story well. I think I heard that in one of your podcasts, that I too can tell it well, and maybe not in the way that you think or you expect.
And in fact, like, you questioning like, oh, how does this person fit into this genre might make you an asset for specific stories, right? I love that.
Well, but to me, that's the thing. And you don't have to be an actor, I think, to be able to understand this. The whole concept of you got to have the thing in order to get the thing, which was the thing I learned in New York. I wanted to be union so badly, but you had to have a union gig to join the union. But how do you get the union gig if you never had a union gig? I mean, the chicken and the egg, like, it was awful.
Yes.
Figure that thing out. And, you know, just straight up acting, like, it's better now, right? Because we can create our own work, whether it's audio, whether it's on camera. But what I really loved and what I just dove into was the fact that we could create the samples for the work that we want. We literally can project what we feel our audiography should be, or what we could do. And it's
but getting people to actually listen to those samples or go to our websites or look at our profiles. Some people do, some people don't, right?
Yes. So I think that also, like how Gail was saying, in the bravery that she has to continue to do it, as opposed to like doing it once, you don't hear anything and you don't come back.
Right.
Like the consistency of like going, I said this and no one wrote me back, so let me say it again, but maybe in a different way. You know what I mean? And are you using that same sample? Probably. You know, if it's been like a couple of months, like you probably wouldn't have changed it. I mean, I do get what you're saying, but I don't know. I mean, we have the samples, we have the bios and the profiles, right? Like anybody that actually has a platform where we can create our own profile, to me, that's the easiest way, right? Because you know they're using that. Ahab, you know they're using it. Podium, you know they're using it. Dreamscape, you know they're using it. Macmillan, just go on.
Some of them you can't get in their database until you've already done a book for them.
I mean,
so
yeah,
you don't
that
really
is
have the
tricky.
same access. So that's the chicken before the egg thing. Like, okay, so how do I get the first book?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to get the first book, you got to create the first book, whether that's with your samples, whether that's with like Meet the Producers, you know,
or you produce your own audiobook, public domain, you find an author, you write your own book. There is a lot, you're right. There's a lot of makers agency in this corner of acting for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't done that yet. I'm really thinking about doing that for my Cat Cozy Mystery, though.
Oh my gosh, we're all still waiting. We've all
This
been
is
waiting.
the podcast joke. The final episode of this season is going to be us just making this.
I have been on ACX looking for it, like just something that was like close to it. And I was like, did I speak something that doesn't really actually, like it's not out there? And I'm like, you know, I would never say that I'm an author, but I might become one just so I can do it.
Yeah, I'm also like so interested, I think, in, we keep saying chicken and egg and I keep going in my head, chicken, egg, or Taft-Hartley, which came first. But like,
right?
There's this really fascinating condition that I've been like sitting through, and I feel like we might have touched on it in previous episodes too, of like, let's say there's a producer at X publisher or whatever, and they only send me like 4 auditions a year. But every time they send me on audition, I'm like, oh, that's my book. Like, that's my book. And so if you are, we're really stringing together, and all of us stringing the same web, we're stringing together this web of like, okay, here's the things I want to narrate. Here are the people who makes those things, like the companies. Here are the producers who work for those companies. Here are my relationships to those individual producers. Here's me. Here's the way I want to communicate myself. Here's my relationship to this genre. Here's the part of that genre that I want to like connect with. And so here's this one demo. And it's like this, like, spider webs are like 2-dimensional, right? It becomes this like sphere of webs that you have to build. And at some point I'm like, yeah, like if you sent out like 3 emails and you want to break into sci-fi and no one is sending you a sci-fi book, like that's frustrating because that's a lot of like pinning things together that you have to do sometimes to kind of get into that space.
But that's the work, isn't it? That's the work. That's why this is not a job that you just come into and everything just magically appears at your feet. We are doing the work behind the scenes before it ever shows up, right?
Come on.
And you said relationships, but it's the relationships we build with everybody that we work with, because people do talk within the industry too. And I think our reputations precede us, good or bad or indifferent, right? So every project that I work like it's the best project I've ever worked on because I want it to be. I want to be that professional that they know they can count on to hit the deadline, to do my research, to ask the questions ahead of time, to not have a ton of pickups, to respond quickly whenever they reach out to me. And then when I say, hey, you know, I'd really love it if you give me a shot on this, then they're more likely to do so because they know that I am a professional and I wouldn't ask for it if I weren't prepared to do it, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, you and André have both touched on it. Research. André knows. I am a huge advocate for research. There are so many people who have gone before us who have done it. Like Karen Commons speaks my love language, okay? That narrator roadmap, all of that beautiful data you can just comb through. And then she gives you resources so you can go even further and go even deeper. But the thing is I think some people don't equate experiences as being just as important as, like, you know, statistical type of information. You know, how is this relationship going? You know, that is a perfect example. The 4 people or the 4 times you hear from one person, and every time they contact you, it feels like they've curated that book specifically to you. You know, I think you need to make note of that. I think you need to be aware of that, and you need to, you know, figure out how to nurture that. Let's go back to the seeds, right? And like literally, you know, create sprouts, because like if they're sending you one of the same type of thing and it's just like so great and juicy and perfect every time you get it, what's the next new thing that is new to them that has been a part of you that you can share with them, where that's like your new seedling, you know? The whole concept.
And even acknowledge their effort in matching us with that book that was curated just for me.
Yeah.
I've said, wow, thank you. I feel so seen and heard.
Yeah.
Because you sent me this and this is how I relate to it, you know?
Yeah. Deanna and I still think Deanna and I did a book together, and I was like, how did you think of us for this? I love it. I love it.
I know.
Oh my God.
I know. I've been waiting, because I have no credits anymore on Audible. Like, I fly through them. And I've been waiting for the local library to get this book so I can actually listen to it. And they finally got it. Like, and I'm like, yes! It's pretty good, André. It's pretty good.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's the thing about the multi-narrator or, you know, dual narrations is I might not listen to mine right away, but I want to hear how the whole story comes together with other narrators, right?
Yeah.
This is just to expand on this vision of like Deanna at a desk with like 4 monitors doing research about the audiobook industry. Like, I really cannot understate the importance of, I think, like learning more about not just production companies and publishers like broadly, but really like they all have themes. Like, I remember learning about, because Podium does a lot of like sci-fi fantasy with a kind of heavy sphere around lit RPG and then like romance. And recently hearing a Podium producer be like, right now we are acquiring romance. Like, that is where we are focusing and emphasizing. So if you're looking for your like pretty little, like, you know, trip to find myself in Italy lit fic and you're emailing Podium, you have not done your research, right? Like, even thinking about the ways in which they might deviate from that. Like, I just did a book that I love. It was a YA for Blackstone. And Blackstone is not out here really pushing a lot of YAs. Like, I don't think they even have a YA category on their website. And so, but that was just what came up in the acquisitions. And it's that is the work, like Sanya said, like it's being on top of what you want, but then also like keeping this image, this specific enough to think of you, but vague enough to be open to like all kinds of work, image of you in the minds of producers, like as consistently as possible. And I think everyone does it so differently. Like, some people are like super strong at that email game. I love showing up to events when I can afford them. Like, there's all these different kinds of ways to constantly be on people's minds, but it feels so rooted in who am I and what do I want?
Yeah, and that's wasted resources if you're not walking into that room or sending that email or showing up at that networking event. Like, you know, knowing exactly how you walk through that door and meeting those people and kind of knowing maybe something about them or being curious to learn more about them through that very concrete, crystallized, fluid, but distinct version of you, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of cycling back, right? Because even in doing the research, like, what's your style? What is your style of learning? What is your style of communication that's successful for you? So if like actually getting in like elbows deep and just, you know, making notes literally on everything, Oh, I'm getting so happy just thinking about it. Maybe journaling is a thing for you. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's not a spreadsheet. I think.
I dare show you my Madhouse journal right here? This is where all the
Right?
secrets are kept.
Right? I mean, and that
Yeah.
kind of comes back to like really
Yeah.
knowing yourself, identifying
Yeah.
yourself, or at least being open to discover. And then also realizing that just because it was like that in 2021 doesn't mean that it's like that today.
Mm-hmm.
And being ready to like shift, right? And be malleable a little. To kind of roll with the punches and go, oh, so and-so is here now. And now everything they do is this.
This is also, can I throw a taboo thing out there and get the temperature? So
Yeah.
do you all track, because I feel like we have some data miners over here. Do you all track who else gets cast in auditions you get put up for? Because I feel like that's a really wonderful way to figure out how somebody sees you. Yeah.
Sometimes.
I know it's
Not
I know
always.
it's not
I'm not
always the most
consistent
comfortable
about
thing.
it.
Yeah.
But I know that Deanna and I have been up against each other for the same book, and we'll be talking and she'll say, oh yeah, I'm working on, this when there's no NDA or whatever. And I'm like, oh, you got it. Okay. That's cool. That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Or André, I think you've gotten a couple that, were not gender specific that I had auditioned for. And I was like, oh, André got it. Of course, André got it,
I love it when somebody I know is getting something,
Yep,
if it's
me
not
too.
me. And
Me
then
too.
also the other thing of kind of going, I've auditioned with people where I wouldn't have cast myself for the book if I would have known that those were the other people they were auditioning with. I'm like, so why was I in the mix? And then it was like, but I was in the mix.
But that's
You know,
interesting,
and
right?
right.
Because then you're
Yeah.
like, somebody's perceiving me a way that I'm not aware. And like,
Mhm.
and it's almost like
Absolutely.
you can look at your peers and colleagues who you admire and be like, oh, I
Absolutely.
like that thing about them. Maybe I have a little bit of that. Like, that's kind of fun.
Absolutely.
So so when I really figured out that there was really something to figuring out how to become union, right? When I was just starting out in New York, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do like my first big regional theater contract. And I'm going to do like my first national tour, right? And then after I did that, I was like, let me just see if I can get on the other side of the table and I can figure out how they're making this sausage. Because I'm not really agreeing with like all of the decisions. Like I have opinions. I was like, so let me just jump in it. So I did. I was a casting director. I was a talent agent. Like I was booking people.
That's so cool.
I worked in arena, booking bands and stuff. I worked with models. I've been to like Fashion Week in New York many times. Milan as well. It was nice. And so like really kind of getting into the back of it. And of course, you can do this just by talking to someone who's willing to share their experiences with you. You don't have to go as deep as me. I just needed to do that. So I felt like with the knowledge of that, I had more confidence to be like, oh, I see, maybe I'm the only one that's a little bit different this way, or we're all the same costume size, right? So what is it that they're actually looking for? Look, that thing when they used to lay out the headshots and just play tic-tac-toe. Well, if we do this, then we need to do this. Well, he's actually 5'5" and she is 6'2". That's not going to work. Okay, so then if we, so when it comes to those sort of things, you got to remember it's relative. It's all about that one individual person in that moment for that one project. And it doesn't mean that they'll never think about you for anything else. It's just that one thing. But for me, that was kind of all part of that research process of not just knowing where I was from where I was coming from with my own experience, but actually being able to gain some of that information firsthand on the perception that other people would have. Like sassy, like that word followed me forever. And I was like, I am not sassy. Just because I have energy, I'm sassy? Like, what is that? In the South, sassy is not a great word, okay? Like it's derogatory. And I was like, what do they mean by that? I found out what they meant by that. that I'm fun and I'm youthful and like all this other kind of stuff. And I have opinions, usually strong opinions, and that's what they were considering sassy. And I was like, there's so many other ways to say that. And necessarily like how someone communicates something is not how it's given, and how it's received is not necessarily the same. So I think that's all part of the research too, when you have the opportunity, which is why training is important. And people are like, I felt like that read was kind of flat. Can you explain to me like what you think it was missing? Because telling me something was flat, do you want more energy? Do you want more emotion? Like, what do you want? Do you need a stronger point of view? Like, give me specifics, right? We were talking about specifics.
Ooh, girl. And as a Black woman, giving energy is not always perceived the way we would like it to be perceived. So there's that.
Where's Jillian?
I'm just saying. That's another episode, I'm sure. But
it's worth saying again because it also says more about the perception of the person writing that breakdown or casting you than it maybe actually does about the quality of what you're giving.
All the time.
Right.
This topic of like who ends up with books that you audition for is endlessly fascinating to me. I early on, I was constantly looking to see who would get cast in stuff that I auditioned for. And I like essentially started identifying what the rings were. Like a couple weeks ago, someone emailed me and they're like, oh, I want to put you up for this book. It's for a non-binary Latino character. I'm only putting up 3 actors for it. And I'm like, I know who those 2 other actors are going to be. Or like me, Kirt, and Mark Sanderlin always joke about how we always go up for the same like queer YA or like queer middle grade titles.
Yes.
Exactly. So, and knowing these rings to me is so fascinating, but also so reaffirming of my own work. Recently, and I guess this will technically be the public revelation because I didn't tell him, but I have a very positive experience about this. But I just directed a book and I auditioned for that book and I found out I didn't get it when they asked me to direct it. And at first I was like, is that a good idea?
Yeah.
And then I really enjoyed the experience because this is a different person. This person is a narrator who is not me, who makes other choices, right? Yeah. And the reason they were cast is because they don't make the choices I make. And it was so just like settling and reaffirming to not like, it felt like the ultimate like experience of seeing what it means that not getting something based off of like an audition you did does not mean that you need to change your approach as an actor or that you need to change your style, right?
No, because the very choices that you made that got you not cast in that one are the ones that get you cast for the books that you do get,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Or posting, I recently posted a book I was recording and someone on my Instagram story and someone mentioned that they had auditioned for it. And I got to listen to their audition for it, like in the middle of recording this book. And I was like, this is so cool to listen to because it is just this reality about how art is an interpretative process. And as audiobook narrators, we are making an interpretative point. And that, I think, actually really does break down a lot of the truth about like moving across genre. Because I think auditions are this point for so many people, especially a narrator that doesn't feel as confident in their approach yet, where you are trying to anticipate what is expected of you and producing that. Yes. Whereas I think what really gives you power in an audition is thinking, oh, what is my interpretation of this? And let me create the most me version of this and send it off into the world to see if this is what's right for the project right now.
And how do I tell this story? Not what are they expecting, but really, who am I in this story and how do I want to tell the story, right? And we can also learn from each other, especially when our friends are the ones that are getting cast, right? Deanna got a book that we had both auditioned for. They came back to both of us and said, go a little lighter on the accent. I went a little lighter on the accent. Deanna got rid of the accent and Deanna booked it. So having that conversation told me a lot about how I could have better approached that, but also that, hey, she's onto something here, you know?
Yeah. I mean, because really what I did is I was like, well, look, if I were this person in this location, and I've been in that location, I was like, how would I be speaking in this location? Like how you talk about kind of being in an environment and certain things kind of come up. So I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do it like that. I'm going to do it like I'm there. And then we'll just see what happens. Because it was a very distinct accent and they said they wanted that. And then they were like, oh, actually, no.
Well, that goes so back to the thing of like, do folks who are giving these opportunities even know quite what they're asking for? And they're often trying to meet somebody else's expectations who's also maybe not translating, appropriately. Yeah. And the thing that I'm also thinking of is like, you'll understand this because you've worked in other mediums and other parts of storytelling, but we're almost pitching ourselves as whether I'd say the director, cinematographer, the caretaker of that story into its next version. And so it's not just, am I the right casting? It's like, here's my take on this. Yeah. Does that match up with you guys? Cool. Mm-hmm. Like, so you just got to do it your way. And it could come down to the accent choices, but it's probably more about like this sort of synergy of Deanna's take on this piece was right for the author, for the casting folk, whatever, for whatever reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the one thing I will say is that the natural, like that first instinct, that is your natural instinct. That's without any notes or direction, right? Like your first read and you kind of are playing that movie in your mind between whatever the situation is, the scene, the setting, if there's dialogue, like what is that? That's usually going to be the easiest thing for you to reproduce because it was like an instinctual reaction, right? To what you had on the page. And you can grow from that. And you can also be directed around in a way and even stronger through that. But again, it's kind of coming back to that self, right? And actually being able to identify, if this was me in this hockey romance, like
on the rink, skates on.
Life, If I was in Nova Scotia, how would I be living there? That sort of thing. But I think that really ties in with really figuring out, like how you were saying, how do we continue to keep telling people, right, consistently, but there's different ways to do it, right? So one, we do have the reach outs. And honestly, since having Hillary Huber on the podcast, because, you always can learn something new, and I did that day, to the point where I was like, oh, yeah, that's a different way to think about it. For me now, in audiobooks, auditions are a reach out for me. They're literally an opportunity, right? They're an opportunity for me to go, oh, yeah, I've got this in my wheelhouse. I've actually done this, on stage. I just haven't done it in a book yet. Let me do it for you. Or it's like, oh my gosh, this is one of the things I've always wanted to do, but I've just never shared it because it's a little thing like back here. But actually, this is like part of my childhood. So yeah, I would love to do this. And so for me, auditions are reach outs now. Branding. I mean, I think it was Steve Wagner, maybe, who specifically said something like, well, what's on your Instagram? And I want to say he's probably one of the first producers I heard actually say that. Because most people don't want to be connected to you, but even though they're not connected to you, doesn't mean they're not looking at you. So it's like, that's important. And then one of the things that Sanya and I have talked about more than once is pseudonyms. Like pseudonyms were a tangible way for me to get someone to think of me in a different way for a different genre. Because as Deanna, they might see me very much so as this one or small, grouping of things, as opposed to like, I want to do fairy romance. And so if I'm a pseudonym and I'm giving you fairy romance and you just listen to that track and you're like, this is amazing. And they're like, oh, this is Deanna?
Yeah.
And, when I first started, I was also writing my book and I knew how my book would attract a certain audience. So I had my initial pseudonym as, my romance person. And you know how we all start out not as good as we want to be. So she eventually got retired. But since then, I created another pseudonym that is my keeper because I've created this catalog of mostly nonfiction. And so I want to be seen in this other light too. And I wrote, I chose a cool name, wrote a nice bio for her, and started shopping her around. I'm starting to get more of those romance books now, and I'm sure that it will continue to grow as more and more books actually get released.
Yeah.
Nice.
I made a decision at one point to do a book. It was a romance book that could have gone under either name. And I took it on royalty share because I just wanted to build the catalog. So these are things that I think we can make business decisions about too. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that book didn't come out as quickly as I would have liked, but it still got me practice. Doing a book, anytime we do a book in a genre, that just builds our confidence, builds our experience level, and is more the better for it. And, taking X sessions at conferences, that kind of thing. It's money. It's so much money we can invest. And what I found is that I've had to be very strategic about what I'm going after next because I can't spend all the money at once. I don't have all the time at once. But if this is my focus this quarter or this year, then I can actually see progress in that. And then I can move on to the next goal.
I feel like the scenario I have found myself in terms of genre, snuck up on me. And I'm curious how it connects to and relates to other people's experiences. I mentioned that I started my first 4 or 5 books were all fantasy. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is what I'm going to be cornered into for the rest of my life. And in the first year, the first 50 books, I'd say that was not in 1 year. The first 50 books, I'd say that I could kind of say oh, YA and middle grade were big. And then maybe one pocket of something else. And it feels like it's continued to spread. And I feel like I am not in a space where I'm kind of only doing a lot of a specific genre all the time. And I love that. I love the variety in that. It's something that I actively seek and try to create. And it's really, I think, interesting to because it wasn't something that I was here's my game plan. Here's my red string across the wall that I'm going to make this happen. But I'm also wondering what things I can learn and pull from it in this kind of context and in this kind of conversation. Cause I think there are people who get joy from being in specific genres. I would want to name that. Absolutely. I think there are also people who get joy from being seen in these multifaceted ways. I think part of what's hard is this thing that we're saying of you create and become and you convey, and then suddenly people are wait, you don't want to be seen that way anymore? You want what? You want that space over there? I really wonder if, gosh, I want to pull a completely ready to go system out of my head and be what do you think of this? Right. And even just based off of what Deanna has been suggesting, this set of thinking about research and relationships, thinking about your bios, and thinking about how you structure your pseudonyms. What if that was a whole thing? You put together a pseudonym, you're doing all these books in this genre you want to make, and there's this big debut on your Instagram, yes, that is me. These two people are connected. But I don't know. I guess the question I have is what do you want to make of yourself in this context of the conversation we're having? What are the spaces that you want to arrive in? And what do you feel are the things that are getting you, moving you towards that?
I like that you said you want to name that you appreciate the facets that you're being seen in right now. I'm not quoting you exactly, and I too want to name that. I enjoy the nonfiction that I've done. That's why it comes across the way it does, because I'm being cast in books about topics that I'm really passionate about. And while I may not be that person that's out there posting a whole bunch of stuff and, you know, being very public about how I feel that the books that I say yes to speak a lot about who I am and what I believe in, right? I'm a romantic. I am a musician. I enjoy all of these things. I'm very, intellectual and analytical. And I love like the psychological legal thrillers, you know? So like I can do all of that stuff. I think that in a lot of romance, they want a lighter voice, but there are certain types of romance that my voice is made for, you know,
that's
where
right.
you have that, Deanna, sassy character, or, you know, she's smart or maybe a little older or whatever, you know, that's me. I am that person that you can cast in that role. So I think that going back to what André said at the beginning is we have to know ourselves and what we bring and be comfortable with that. You know, when I first started in audiobooks, I heard people say your genre might not be the genre you think it is, but it really can be if you understand who you are and what you bring.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it's also twofold. I think we just have to be prepared, right? Like we have to, as artists and performers, we need to be ready to meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Some people aren't necessarily ready to see all facets of different people.
100%.
Right? Because of their own experience, right? So
that's right.
They hear you. And so then they really just see you one way. And I'm going to say, keep sending me those books, right? Because those dollar bills, you know, spend the same way. I'm not saying that genres that you're consistently booking in is a bad thing. But, you know, we're all three-dimensional and those are the kind of lives that we're living. So there's always going to be more than one thing that any person can do, even if it's a subgenre change, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we need to be ready to communicate, you know, what our wishes and desires are, what our skill levels are, but we also need to be ready for people not to be at the place to receive it and to do anything with it. And then we have to be ready to take the next step, right? If that's like the reaction. That's kind of like the whole thing with like, you know, the reach outs. Like I've heard many a person talk about like not hearing back from people. And also, let's talk about this one thing for research. I do not track my emails. Why? Because that's not my business. Like, it's just not my business. My business is to move on. The next thing is my business. And if you're working consistently and you're making a living doing this thing, when something doesn't happen, you have to move on to the next thing, right? Like it has to keep moving forward so you can pay your rent and your light bill. So, I mean, when it comes down to that, like you were talking about being sassy, right? I can give you sassy. I'm just not really interested in living in sassy, right? But I will live in the speaking truth to light, right? I will live in universal love. Like where are those stories, right? Whether they're nonfiction, whether it's romance or whether it's literary fiction, like whatever it is, like it's just these things that are a part of me that are important to me. And what I love most about nonfiction is most of these authors are saying the things that I believe in. They're saying them extremely well. Far better than I could. And then I get to say them, which is amazing because
it is. I
don't think I have I have to actually look. I feel confident in saying, I don't think I have a single nonfiction book where I wouldn't stand. I just narrated someone who says 10 toes down. I would stand 10 toes down on my audiography in nonfiction. I don't think I've done a nonfiction just for the job. I've done the nonfiction to be like, yes, I will do this.
Amazing.
Because whatever it's about is important to me. And I know that I have very specific people who are willing to take a chance on me. And every time they contact me, it's something that's a little bit different where I'm like, oh, excellent. Okay, let's do it. Let's go for it. Even if it's just an audition and I don't book it, but they saw me that way, as opposed to people I can clearly identify. You will only ever see me as this. And okay, that I think that's just part of our research. I think that's just, we have to be ready for that. Right.
That's right.
And
That's
you know,
data,
it's funny because it's not just the work part of it, right? That's people. That's the people part of it.
That's right. Yeah.
So there was something else that I gotta say, Deanna, you and I have talked about this a lot. When I first came into this and I was getting the nonfiction books and everything, the one thing I did not want to do was slavery. And I listened to you, The Devil's Half Acre, I think it was.
That's a book.
That was a tough book, right? Yeah. And I said, I'm so glad she told this story. And then I realized, with all that's going on in the world and people trying to rewrite history and erase history and everything, if we want the stories to be told, we have to be willing to tell them. So I made a decision that, okay, I will tell the stories, even the really difficult ones, right? That being said, it's even more important to me to get the cozy mysteries, the romance, and the mystery thriller, because I cannot bear this burden 100% of the time.
Yes.
The emotional toll is too much. And that's what I want publishers to understand, is that, yes, I'm great at this. Yes, it's important for me to tell these stories. I'm so glad you're publishing these stories and you're getting it out there. But understand that I cannot bear that weight every day in the studio by myself without having something else that makes me smile, that brings me joy, that lightens my load. You know what I mean? That's why I need a mix. It's not just, oh, give me a romance. It's so important to my emotional and mental well-being that I don't think people really understand that.
Yeah.
Can I offer something that's been helpful in the past? Because same, that's a lot of emotional labor to be cornered into, you know, your people's suffering because you're checking a box on a list and somebody needs to fill a quota every single time. But also, like you said, the stories are important to keep telling, and we can feel that importance. And it is a balancing act. I mean, we're telling intense, full-on 3-dimensional stories most days of our lives. Doesn't matter what the content is, that's a ride. So the variety is really important for our well-being. You know, often there's not even the time to like squeeze it all out of your system and just be clean of a story for a while before you step into the next one. Something that's been suggested and something I've started to use is when my capacity is full for a certain amount of time for that type of story, I'll just be honest about that. The offer comes up and I say, thank you so much for thinking of me for this. I love telling these types of stories. They're very important to me. My quota's full until September for this type of book. If you have other things right now, I'm looking for this genre, that kind of thing. Can't wait to work with you again. Thanks so much. And then it's like, they do it, but they also do that. And I get why they might not want to do it all at the same time all the time. Yeah.
So. Make the work that you want me to do sustainable.
Yeah. Make it sustainable. Yeah.
Exactly. Earlier, I had my like jumble of thoughts, and what all of you have been saying has really clarified what I think I wanted to ask. And really the thought is just kind of like this triangle of mission, of joy, and of artistry, and how you clear your way forward. And I think it's also about seeing literature as this tapestry and the genres as artificial distinctions across that tapestry. That like, there might be 2 books, one is sci-fi and one is like contemporary lit fic. And actually the writing is super similar. The way they approach the third person and hovering over the character's emotion is super similar. And that's your like point of entry or point of power across those spaces. And like you said, Sanya, like I think this idea of here, you want me to do this heavy nonfiction, and I also want to do it, but I also need some kind of like joy, some romance, some whatever to balance it out. And thinking about how you put that onus on the publisher to help you do both, I think that's such an empowering framework of, again, like joy, artistry, and mission. And because there are narrators. I have my DEI background. Like, I want to do the new Jim Crows, right? I want to do those. I also want to do The Hate U Gives, but I also want to do the Hunger Games, and I also want to do what's a book that's just happy? Oh my God, I can't think of one. But like you want to like spread out.
Life is suffering.
And it's so interesting because I think that like at the root of this is not just getting to know yourself, but what that means about your narration. Because I think that like, especially for folks who don't find themselves adapting to the truth of the text, I think it's really hard to identify that you don't have to adapt to the expectation of the genre if you're trying to move into another space. That like, if your approach to narration doesn't react to the text that's given to you, then how are you going to like convince yourself that you can move into a different space as long as you are reacting, if you haven't been reacting in the first place? Like that process of like coming to know yourself and what that means for your artistry and what that means for the work you take on and how it becomes your portfolio, that triangle is like so fascinating. And I feel like you can see it form if you pick a random person off of the ACX Narrators Facebook group and look up their Audible listing and kind of like see the history of like what they've been narrating, or see on their Instagram, like you said earlier, Deanna, like what have they been posting and prioritizing on their Instagram or on their website? Like what are they presenting themselves as on their website? And people who maybe don't see every part of that triangle feeling trapped or feeling like they don't have agency in how they navigate their portfolio. So that's like this work is therapy, apparently, because you have to like look inward before you can move outward.
That word tapestry is so beautiful to describe this. And I also just want to, like, you were asking about how we approach expanding genre, André, a while back, and I want to sort of connect to the depth and sort of volume of the medium with which we work. These are not under fives. These are not, little commercial voiceover. Like, these are like full on human stories with many people in them and many things going on and many points of view and hours of audio we're walking out of a project with. Like, we have this opportunity after we've worked on something to then sort of twist the tapestry or spin the kaleidoscope to show a certain angle that we want to show out of that. So maybe you worked on a bunch of different dialects you're really proud of, and you pull clips that show that, or you talk about that in your reach out or your post on social media. Or maybe you really loved the relationship dynamics in this book, and it's about parent and child, and that really fascinated you, and it was a middle grade, but actually that applies to a thriller. Or maybe you really loved the opportunity to come up with make-believe imaginary characters in this high fantasy, but then you start doing some sci-fi. Like, there's all those things you can connect, and you can decide what angle you want to show of that. And so often when I send reach outs or I post on socials, I do think about not what genre do I want to tackle next, but what really lit me up about this thing I just did that makes me hungry for a little taste more of that. And then drop a couple of those out into the universe and see what happens, and not try to control the whole thing, but twist the tapestry just a little bit so the light shines through in a certain way.
I love how this metaphor is coming together, because with this idea of tapestry, like, you get this sheet of fabric and you get to look across literature and see that actually things just blend into each other. And you, in your bios, in your, creation of pseudonym, your branding, your samples, are kind of a seamstress. You are creating an article of clothing. You are bringing, and you're saying to someone like, hey, like, you thought these two things were on opposite edges of the map, but actually I just connected them right next to each other right here to put together this dress, or to put together
art.
This.
Whoa.
Oh my God. Okay. I love
the
this.
Art of
I
perception.
love this. I'm clocking out now. I'll see y'all next week. I got everything I need.
But it's also that thing of not trying to be all things for all people.
Yes.
I don't even think I can count how many times in different ways, in acting coaching specifically, in instruction, that was like, you need to just be you. Because the more you try to twist and change and fabricate for what you think, project, what you think is going to be the thing, that whole thing, like as an actor, like you should be able to do anything. Well, yeah, but specifically, maybe, which in and of itself is a no to that, right? Because it's going to be very specific to you what that is. And you never know what someone else's perception of that is. And so I love this whole thing of kind of like, creating like your own recipe of like putting things together. And I don't know, it just reminded me, I worked with this person. Now, this was corporate. This is what I was working on the other side of the table. And someone asked, they were like, we never met. I don't really know what you do. And this guy was like, don't worry about it. Just let Jimmy do what Jimmy do.
All right.
When it was hilarious. They didn't know how to react to that, but I'll never forget it. I mean, in a corporate setting, it was just hilarious. Don't worry about that. Just let Jimmy do what Jimmy do. And I was like, sometimes that's what you have to say. And then again, you take in that information and you're like, so how are they liking this? Is this a thing? And then also, you were talking about things to share. Like if there's a genre that I've read a lot of, but I haven't had an opportunity, and I should say subgenre because that would make more sense because I've read a lot. I coach it. I coach it specifically, and then I share that I coached it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I've been doing the work. I've been living in this space. Yeah. Pay attention.
Level that up though. Like I am interested about actually creating the tangibles, right? Like whether that's public domain, whether that's, getting work through ACX or like directly with independent authors where you're like, I want to do more of this. And here is this tangible piece that I have done. Like that's something I think I'll investigate more to answer your question, André, and create it that way. I try, like I say, the auditions for me, ever since that podcast with Hillary, that's what I've been doing. So every time I audition, I really think about, is there a personal connect to this for me? And even if it has nothing to do with the story, like, is this set in my dad's hometown? Or like where my mom went to school? Like, what is it?
I did an audition recently where in my message, I talked about how this character is the character that I love to portray because she's this, she's that, she's that. And
there you go.
This wasn't in the piece, but I think she's also this. And you know what I mean? To let them know that I'm really thinking about who this character is and that I know I can tell the story in a way that's authentic to the character.
Yeah. Even on an Ahab audition, when they give you that little box, like use it.
Yes.
Like I just recorded a book last week that I got through Ahab. And I remember when I did that audition and I read the description of the book and the audition scene even, I was like, oh, this is my story. I lived this. Like, you roll the cameras back, you won't see this exact same scene, right? Yeah. And I remember writing into that Ahab box, I said something along the lines of like, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear the sincerity of how deeply I related to this excerpt, but in case it doesn't come across, I want to reiterate it here. Like, I love this story. I would be so honored to tell this story. And and this was one of those books where like, I cried while narrating and we left it in the book. Like it was a soul bond. Like I think that kind of alignment, we not only have to create the space for people to send us those kinds of books, but when we find them, like say something about it. Like yes. I just got sent a book. It wasn't even an audition. They sent me the book and I wanted to reiterate like, oh, like I've been thinking about this book for months. I saw it released. Like I've been following the author do this. Like I'm so excited. like all those kinds of connections, even if it's not like your story in the book, like your whole world connections to that, I think are like so impactful in
and then you start to see it in the auditions that you get or the books that you get.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if you don't book that one, it can't always be about this book that's right in front of me. It's about creating the career that I want, you know, and doing that through the relationships that I create with each person that I come in contact with, you know?
Yeah. I remember I was working with someone on their bio, and there were some details about them that they didn't include. And I was like, oh, like, tell us about some of these hobbies. Tell us about some of these other things you do. And they were like, well, I don't really want to get cast for like, you know, books that are around the subject of my hobbies. And I'm like, well, it's not just about the subject for castability. It's also the fact that these producers are people, that they want to get to know more about you, and you want to create an opportunity to build a relationship with them. Like we are working on both of those levels at all times. It's not just like, I love to knit, so give me a book about knitting. It's, we might both love to knit, and maybe that's going to be the spark that gets you to think of me when that right book comes across your desk.
Yeah. The people quotient. I mean, if we were going to sum it up, you know, I would say, to quote a film, build it and they will come. Isn't that the quote? Something like that. You know what I mean? You got to tell people. You got to tell people, and you got to be ready.
10 toes down.
10 toes down. That's the new thing for this year. I was like, 10 toes down. Yes. It's so definitive and I emphatic. 10 toes down. Oh my gosh. Well, this was amazing. Sanya, thank you so much for not just joining us here today, but for actually bringing this topic and really being passionate about it. I'm so glad that you did, because I knew we were going to have a good time talking about it.
Thank you for having me. This has been wonderful.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's it. That's this episode of the Narrator Roundtable. And you know what? If you haven't already, you can subscribe to the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. That's Audible, y'all. That's Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're on YouTube. Now, if you want to join this conversation, find us on social media on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, y'all. And visit our website at narratorroundtable.com to submit a question or a topic for discussion for any future episode. What is on your mind? Because we want to talk about it. We surely do. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Bye.
The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copywritten material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.